This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast, a podcast with a worldwide listenership that explores the broad world of preservation from every angle, from drones to mudlarking and everything in between. Now, let's get preserving. Today's episode of PreserveCast returns to the United Kingdom to open a conversation with Colin and Dan Richards of CJR Heritage, a company that has spanned continents and worked with princes to save priceless heritage. From Transylvania to the Great Wall of China, we're talking with two of England's most accomplished tradespeople about the future of historic trades. This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast, and we're excited to be joined by two friends from across the pond, just outside of Ludlow, Shropshire. They're coming to us live. We're speaking with both Colin Richards and Dan Richards, built heritage professionals who have worked on a variety of fascinating projects all across the world. They were recommended to us by a previous PreserveCast guest, Peter Ginn, who also serves as Preservation Maryland's, which powers PreserveCast's, our first patron from the United Kingdom. And so we're excited to have them here with us today. So this, we've got father and son here today talking to us about all of this work. And I thought maybe we would start with Colin to kind of set the stage, and then that'll kind of lead into Dan. So Colin, where did you grow up? What led you working in historic building conservation? Where was the impetus for this, and what was your first real job in the field?
My father was a building contractor, specialising in traditional skills and restoring the vernacular buildings around the Welsh border area. And so I grew up working with him, repairing timber frame buildings and churches and various historic buildings, and that really set the scene for a future career. But at the time, I passed a number of exams and ended up going to university, and I studied planning as a first degree, and I was a planning officer in Hereford, a nearby town where the cattle come from. But it wasn't really my sort of spiritual home as a profession. And so I went back to university and studied architectural conservation. And I came out, worked for a restoration builder for a number of years, and then moved into local government as a conservation officer in Hereford. And then I moved up to South Shropshire, to Ludlow, where we have this incredible sort of architecture, which time forgot almost. We were far enough away from the big cities so that redevelopment didn't occur during the 1960s and 70s. So we had a lot of traditional buildings, and we still had a number of craftsmen undertaking traditional skills, but they were moving into retirement. And so I was able, with our museum service, to set up a conservation training facility at the museum. So I was doing my conservation work, representing the local authority, advising people on how to restore buildings, but at the same time helping to train the next generation of building professionals to undertake this work.
So speaking of the next generation, he's sitting next to you. So people listening can't see it, but Dan's right there. So Dan, did this, not everyone who's, if your dad runs a restaurant, you may not end up in the restaurant business. If your dad's a doctor, you may end up, not being a doctor. But you obviously kind of bought into this. Was that sort of always the case, or did you kind of find your way into it?
No, not straight away. I wanted to go off and do tree surgery. So I went off to college and studied to do that, and then realised that wasn't for me. And then went on to study horticulture. And I did horticulture for about 3 years. And it was good, but it just wasn't really what I wanted to do. I enjoyed it, but I had the opportunity to go back to college again and study carpentry. and managed to, qualify and then get into the building trade with my father and my brother in the historic buildings.
So you kind of talked about how you set up this center, and I want to talk about that in a second because there's some parallels here. So Preservation Maryland, we're the statewide group that powers PreserveCast, this podcast, and we have a program in partnership with our National Park Service called the Campaign for Historic Trades, which is an effort to try and create trades training opportunities here in the United States. And we're always about 50 years behind where you guys are in the UK when it comes to historic preservation. So, we're trying to set up these apprenticeships and all these sorts of things that have existed there for some time. But you guys also, in addition to kind of setting up this program, you have CJR Heritage Services, and you sort of run the full gamut on consultancy and restoration and preservation. Do you have a specific type of resource that you guys like to work on that you're really good at? Is it sort of anything historic? What periods do you cut yourself off at? I'm curious what it is you kind of focus in on as a company.
Well, when I was setting up the training facilities, one of the key elements of all historic building construction is the use of locally occurring materials. And so we went back to basics. We built a brick kiln and started making bricks for restoration work.
Wow.
We had some historic lime kilns locally, which were owned by the National Trust, and we got permission from them to bring them back into use and to fire limestone to produce the lime for the restoration work. We have a national agency called DEFRA, Department for Environment, Rural Affairs and Food, and they were responsible for the landscape. And I was able to work with them to reopen some quarries for making the traditional stone, or quarrying the traditional stone for our use. So once, and then with Forestry England, we were able to source some timber, the oaks, where we could sort of cleave them by hand to exactly replicate the original materials that were used in the traditional buildings. And through that process and working with carpenters, stonemasons, bricklayers, we were able to not only gain a whole body of knowledge through that process, but to create a generation of craftsmen that were able to go back to the traditional ways to repair many of the buildings, because we'd had in the post-war period this big push for quick construction using concrete, cement, and so a lot of damage had occurred. And by the 1980s, it was clear that technology wasn't sort of marrying in with the traditional lime-based technologies. And so we had a lot of craftsmen who wanted to go back to using the original materials. And through our training programs, we were able to, and working with local colleges, we were able to help to address that need.
So how many people have you trained? Because you're talking about quarrying limestone kilns, brick kilns. This is labor-intensive kind of work. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people have gone through these programs, or yes. Do you have a sense of the scale?
Probably, we've been doing it for 30 years. So in that time period, it would be in the thousands, actually. But one of the things that came out of this was that building the brick kiln, and this is how I met Peter, was that it gained a lot of publicity, because going back to making bricks in the handmade way in the 1990s was news, and so it was featured on BBC News. And I then achieved an internet profile of making bricks. And I then had a phone call from the Prince's Trust, and Prince Charles wanted me to go out to Romania, to the Saxon Villages World Heritage Site, and build some brick kilns out there because they couldn't get the bricks or tiles for repairing the buildings on this World Heritage Site. So in 1996, we went out, and Dan came out, and my other son, and so we built quite a few brick kilns in Romania for making traditional bricks, and from there went to Poland, doing the same, and eventually, a couple of years ago, they had a major problem on the Great Wall in China, where they couldn't get the bricks as were produced in the Ming dynasty during the mid-16th century. So I was asked to go out there and make bricks and fire bricks for restoration in the Great Wall. So just from one little acorn of, sort of helping to conserve, the buildings in our neighborhood, I ended up having the opportunity to work on the Great Wall in China.
It's fascinating. What an expansive story. And you sort of dropped in there. I mean, we're all eyes are on the monarchy today as we're celebrating the Queen's Jubilee. You sort of mentioned in there that Prince Charles was interested in doing something. Did you actually get to meet him and talk with him?
Oh, yes. We've met him a number of times, both here and in Romania. And because he helped fund the first kiln we made. And he's incredibly knowledgeable on traditional skills. And he came out, and one of the things, obviously, there's a lot of security that goes around with Prince Charles. And so when we were building the kiln, we were working with local workers, but we weren't allowed to say that Prince Charles was coming or that there'd be security. And so, we were working, building, laying bricks in clay and lime and whatever. And I knew what time he was coming. But nobody else did. And then for these local workers, suddenly out of the bushes comes the future King of England, who they recognized. And they all got in the middle of the kiln and started bowing. And it was just a surreal moment, really. But he was so nice with them, and really appreciative of the work that they were doing to conserve their own heritage.
Well, now I can say, because of PreserveCast, I have 1 degree of separation from the future King of England. It's pretty exciting. So Dan, you've been with your dad on these journeys. I'm curious about Eastern Europe. So you've been to Romania, Poland, Slovenia, and I'm curious. Have you thought at all? I mean, this kind of didn't prep you guys for this question, but everything in the terrible tragedy unfolding in Ukraine, is there a thought in the traditional trades community about the eventual restoration and rehabilitation of historic resources in Ukraine? Have you talked to people there? Given your background in Eastern Europe, you might be plugged into that conversation.
Yeah, there's definitely been some ideas bounced around, really, on what we can do to help us. Everyone's looking to help where they can with the terrible situation. So yeah, it's been mentioned. Once it's calmed down a bit, what we can do to help preserve and look after the buildings over there as well as the people as best we can.
And you focus more on carpentry. So yeah. How did you, and that kind of makes sense, right? Because you were interested in repairing trees, and now you just make things out of trees. So you kind of started, you're talking about tree surgery, right? It was so, but now you don't do tree surgery, but you kind of put old trees together.
It all comes into one skill, really, because we've done a lot of greenwood structures for different festivals. We've building out of roundwood timber. So we can go off into the forest and I can fell the trees and machine them up and then be able to put them into use in a building from that location locally.
Well, maybe this is a good place to take a quick break, come back, talk about some of your favorite projects, what you're working on, what the future holds, not only for CJR, but just traditional trades in the United Kingdom and around the world for that matter. And we'll do that right here in PreserveCast. Historic preservation can't happen without skilled tradespeople to perform the work. And there's a critical need right now for those tradespeople. The Campaign for Historic Trades, powered by Preservation Maryland, is working to meet that need by strengthening apprenticeship opportunities within historic trades. In partnership with the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center and Conservation Legacy, the campaign is currently recruiting for NPS Traditional Trades Apprenticeship Program, or TTAP. TTAP's an intensive 20-week apprenticeship that provides young adults the chance to learn historic trade skills while working on America's most iconic historic sites. Multiple positions are open for the 2022 season at national parks across the country. Visit historictrades.org for more information on TTAP and how to apply today. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're excited to be joined by two friends coming to us from England. We're talking with Dan Richards and Colin Richards about all the work that they've done to advance the traditional trades and how one brick kiln led to not only working with the future King of England, but also getting them all the way across to the Great Wall of China and sort of everything in between in Eastern Europe. You've worked on, I mean, it must be at this point, collaboratively, hundreds, if not thousands of projects over the years. Are there ones that stand out, early ones where you learned a lot, or ones that were really challenging, or ones that you're really proud of? Are there standout projects that even amongst this long list of projects you still kind of hold on to as favorites? I mean, and that goes for either. Maybe we'll start with Colin and then go to Dan.
Well, I think one of the things throughout all these projects is that you've got the technical side of it, but you've also got the human element too. And if you have a skill or a craft, it's like having a language, really. You can communicate with almost anyone. And having this shared endeavor, working on a project together and actually achieving something, that is the main feeling of satisfaction, really, that you've helped someone to have a better life, either to earn extra money through an additional skill or through improving their own environment. And one of the projects that we did was we built a bridge in a village called Viskri in Romania. And we had to span this watercourse. And it was a combined endeavor, because we've also learned a lot as well. You know, it's not just a one-way street. You know, we come away having learned a great deal, and we had to drive these probably sort of 12-inch diameter oak stakes into the ground, and we thought we're never going to do that. And one of the local lads set up this tripod, and we had the front weight of a Russian tractor over a pulley, and we all, just like the Egyptian pyramids, we all got on this rope, pulled it up over the stake and dropped it down, and we were able to drive these piles in through teamwork and to create the basis for then building the bridge over this watercourse. And that was a very memorable one. You touched on Ukraine, and one of the sad things was that I went out to the Polish-Ukrainian border to work helping build the clay straw houses that they have out there, and to both learn the technology so that our own housing associations here could consider building in the very locally occurring material, but also to help conserve there. And again, the hospitality that we were shown and the type of places that we worked in, sadly, you now see on the TV, being sort of recklessly damaged, and that's really sad for us. But also, as Dan said, we have a lot of friends in Romania who they're also looking towards seeing how they could help, because that whole tract of Central Europe, the architecture and the construction techniques are all very, very similar. So the skills are portable across borders.
Dan, what's been your favorite?
Well, the work out in Eastern Europe has been definitely some of the more challenging logistically, but also the work, the skills and equipment you've got over there. So over here we can go to the local sawmills, get timber machined straight up, and it's no problem, it's done in a day. Over there you're dealt with what you've got to hand, really. So the timber could be well oversized and you've got to axe it down and cut it on site. And that definitely brings a bit of team bonding together when we're all having a laugh and a joke. And like Dad says, it doesn't matter that you can't speak each other's languages, because we both know what the end result is of machining this timber by hand down. One of the main projects that we've worked on is a big fortified church in Almaviv, and that was about 4 years in the making, the project. And we went in right at the start to help advise and work with the locals, from the foundations to the roof to loads of different areas. And then in the UK, there was a little thatched cottage just outside of Ludlow that we restored, and that was a full overhaul, and we got an award for best restoration that year for a holiday let, and a conservation award as well. So that's probably been my favourite UK project.
Fascinating work. And I was going to ask you if you can speak Romanian or Polish or anything like that. And you must have some broken Polish after all these years, but
we can get by, certainly. In Romania, we know the names of all the tools and the food and the meal times, and we can get by. One of the things that you're sort of not prepared for, but it's one of the joys of it, is the different sort of traditions and belief systems that different groups have that you're working with. Because when we were working in this fortified church, they'd had a lot of rabbits. You get rabbits in the States.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the rabbits had dug up the bones of ancient burials. And we were working there, sort of 3-4 o'clock. And we'd noticed we were there on our own. And we hadn't seen the local people disappear, but as soon as the light started to come down, they wouldn't work in the church where there were exposed bones or anything. And it took a while for us to understand that it was that was the issue. And when I was in China, they thought that everybody in the West were big drinkers, and at lunchtime, we were up on the top of the wall on this mountain, and they brought this big table up, and they lined up all these little shot glasses full of this rice spirit, and I said what was going on, and they said it's a drinking competition between you and our best drinker from the village. And I said, I can't do that. And they said, yes, but you're from the West. You drink a lot. I said, no, well, I don't mind having one, but I'm not going to sort of have 20 or 30. And he said, yeah, but it's a competition. And I said, look, there's a bit of a misunderstanding here. I'll have a drink with you, but I'm not drinking that quantity.
That is an outstanding. I didn't know we were going to get into a Chinese drinking competition on this episode, but you've taken us there. I'm curious. We're broadcasting here recording from the United States. Have you come over to the U.S. to do any projects?
No, we've never been to the States.
But have you ever actually been over to the U.S. at all?
No.
Oh, well, we need to figure out a way to get you over here and work on something, because as I mentioned, we've got this trades program that we're trying to get off the ground that is a partnership with our National Park Service. And I'm curious, given all that you've seen and all that you've done in kind of creating trades programs, are there any gems of advice that you would give to people not only here in the U.S. but across the world that are thinking of trying to start these up? Were there pitfalls? Were there things that you wish you had known kind of going into it? And maybe what accounts for the success that you've had?
I think basically it's showing respect to the people you're working with, because quite often we're working with existing craftsmen who have built up a body of knowledge. They're proud people, and they just want to learn that extra layer of information relating to traditional buildings. And if you can establish the human dynamic of working together, sharing knowledge, sharing information, and say from the outset that you're hoping to learn from them as well, then it takes down barriers, and it becomes a mutual process of learning. And that has been particularly successful in Eastern Europe and China, because you're not sort of imposing this sort of teacher-pupil relationship. But with the younger students, it's carrying them with you, showing in small steps what they can achieve with their own hands, and giving them encouragement, not expecting them to be a cabinet maker at the end of the first week, but doing it in a sort of gradual process, building up their confidence, and praising them when they get things right, but also being very clear if things aren't good enough, that you've got to try harder. And when they do and they make success, that's when they get the praise. So it's the basic sort of human skills of communication, as well as the knowledge of the technical subjects you're dealing with.
I think it came across as well a lot when there's such thing as the World Iron Smelting competition. So when you have to make a furnace out of raw materials, clay and bricks, and do an iron smelt, and it can go one of two ways, really. You can have all the skill and best knowledge going into it, but on the day it can be totally weather dependent, wind, the stone you get given, and everybody is there to learn and look at other tricks that other people are doing, and learning from everyone. Never too old to learn something new. So it's really just going with an open mind, isn't it, as well, really? And
yeah, well, Dan touched on the fact that we do experimental archaeology as well, and one of the things in terms of learning from the past is to understand the industrial processes which created the objects that you'll find in the ground when you're doing the archaeology. So one of the things that we've done recently with Peter's colleague Alex, I was down at Swansea University, they were celebrating the fact that Swansea in the 19th century was called Copperopolis, which it was the major copper producing centre in the world. And so we were asked to go down and smelt some malachite and make something out of the raw ore, and to sort of demonstrate the process. And we've done that with iron ore, making within a little bloomery furnace, making the iron bloom, and then refining it down to a bar, which you can then make tools and other things out of.
But also going back in the processes of finding what materials you need to get to that stage, so then it comes into the charcoal making and making your own charcoal in the traditional way to then be able to put into the furnace to then smelt the iron ore.
Well, I'm sure, like most listeners, I just want to come and spend like a month with you guys, and I want to participate in this, in the all these different contests that you're talking about too. This sounds like a lot of fun. So, what's next? What's next on the docket? What are you working on now? I mean, obviously, I guess we're coming out of COVID. You know, it feels like maybe we are, maybe we aren't. Who knows? But what projects are you working on right now?
Well, I think what COVID has done, it's sort of repressed a lot of projects that people were, would otherwise have implemented. So we've got this huge surge of work that now exists, and I'm doing a lot of sort of heritage statements for people to accompany planning applications where they want to do works to a historic building, but they need an independent heritage assessment to accompany the application, so that the local government people can understand what the impact will be on the special interest of the building. We're helping advise on the repair of a castle in the Lake District in the north of England, Lyolf Castle on the side of Ullswater. And then the boys have got so many timber framed projects which extend from sort of doing the basic wattle and daub and clay and lime to modern eco breathable infill panel systems, but Dan will explain more.
Yeah, the current project we're working on at the moment is a Tudor Hall that's got incredible history along with it, that used to have a big abbey next to the property, and when Henry VIII was in reign and power, he had it destroyed, and the people from the hall, the farm, went and rummaged through the ruins and got a load of the carvings and panel work and put that into their house. Now this property that we're working on has got some incredible features in a farmhouse, but we're doing a load of timber frame repairs on that have been done about 30 years ago using cement mortars, which has not helped the building at all, not allowing it to breathe. So we're going in there and putting breathable infill panels in, doing the timber frame repairs, so splicing new timbers in, trying to keep as much as the old timber as possible, but then going in and putting the new breathable panel system in to expel the moisture and allow the property to breathe as it should.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. We probably could do 3 more of these and not even scratch the surface of all that you've worked on. And we will put links in the show notes to, your website and everything like that, so people can find you and kind of connect with the work that you're doing. Before we go, the thing we ask, and everybody hems and haws and has a tough time with this, but if you had to pick one, what is your favorite historic site?
Well, I suppose for me, in the UK, it's Ludlow, and in Romania, it's Sighișoara.
I'd have to say Sighișoara.
And what is Sighișoara? Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a medieval fortified town in Transylvania.
It's sadly best known for the home of Dracula as well, in where he was born, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Birthplace of
Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad the Impaler. So that's what it's. But no, it's just a stunning. It's a World Heritage Site.
It's World Heritage Site.
Yeah. So it's
that
or Slovenia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bohin or Lake Bled in Slovenia.
Yeah. But one of the things, Nick, just you triggered a memory, was that we had this really obscure request. Do you get Top Gear in the US with
yes.
Clarkson, May and Hammond? Well, we had this email that there was this project which involved the skills that we have. Would we be interested in meeting this man in a hotel? But we had to agree for it to be secret at the time. And it was so intriguing that they said yes. And we went there, and they wanted us to use our traditional skills with bricks and clay and wattle and daub to make vehicles. And once we got into it, they explained it was for a Grand Tour episode 4.
Sure.
And what they were, it was a joke on the eco vehicle theme, in that we had these Land Rover chassis, and we had to build a vehicle out of bricks or out of clay, and they were going to race them and come to the conclusion that eco vehicles weren't as good as modern vehicles. But because we were asked to do so many, we had to hire a unit from a local farmer, and we weren't allowed to say before it was aired what we were doing. So we had to say it was a university project looking at alternative materials for making cars. And the farmer thought we were mad. But when he saw it on the Grand Tour, he was highly amused.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to put a link to that episode of the Grand Tour, which I think is available on Netflix or Amazon here in the States. Yeah. This has been fascinating. We're going to have you back, and then we're going to figure out a way to get you on your first Grand Tour of the United States here sometime soon. Because we need to get you guys over and get you. There's a lime kiln about 5 minutes from my house. It needs to be refired. It hasn't been fired in about 150 years. But I think if two people can do it, it's these two that we're talking to. So, Colin and Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Be well, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.